This week, the United States government is renaming the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, and Google is capitulating by going along with it for American Google Map users. I say Canada renames it the Gulf of Southern Canada. Why? Because we're going to rename the United States to Southern Canada.
The United Arab Emirates is building the world's largest solar farm with battery storage. It'll provide 1 gigawatt of consistent baseload power, kind of like having a nuclear power plant, but without all the deadly radiation and blowing up and melting down to the core of the earth, that kind of thing.
We learn why some trees are left standing while entire neighborhoods around them are turned into ashes in wildfire. It's partially because trees aren't allowed to have attics in California.
Washington State has come up with an e-bike incentive program. Instead of first come, first served, the subsidies will be handed out with a lottery system. So, like a lottery, I guess that means the winner gets a $1 million e-bike? Fantastic!
And after nearly 5 years of this podcast, we take a look at the state of electric vehicle adoption. It's going extremely well in Norway and China, but not so well in southern Canada. All that and more on this edition of the Clean Energy Show. As well, this week, I've got a book report to update you on my reading, and not really talking about the Gulf of Mexico. I just had to get that off my chest. A listener says France shows us the way forward with nuclear, and a lot more, as always.
Got a letter from my brother. He writes in occasionally, and he talked about a few things, but the one thing I wanted to mention was he was kind of complaining about he's been buying LED light bulbs, high-efficiency LED light bulbs, and they just haven't been lasting as long as they're supposed to. You know, they always have claims of... Yeah, and I've had that problem too. Like, you know, a lot of my LED bulbs have gone prematurely. Some of them in the early days is because they hadn't quite figured it out. And I think the problem now is they're just trying to bring production costs down lower and lower. So, you know, they're using cheaper components or whatever. But the only piece of advice I can give would be to say, and we've talked about this kind of thing before, but I would stick with major name brands when you're looking for LED bulbs. I think that helps a little bit. And if you're putting them in an enclosed fixture, you need to make sure that the bulb is rated for that. And you really have to read like the fine print on the box.
Because they can heat up, but even though they don't produce as much light, the electronics in them can heat up if they're in a closed space. So, and then they'll fry.
Yeah, so when they overheat, that's one of the major causes of them failing early. So if it's an enclosed fixture where the bulb is completely enclosed, you have to make sure that you buy one that's rated for that, and they might be a little bit more expensive.
90% of my lights are smart bulbs. So I've got Philips Hue as well as Globe bulbs from Costco, which are lower cost.
Yeah.
They're like, I don't know, $5 each or something when you buy 4.
No, and I've had some of my Hue lights fail, which is really annoying because those can be quite expensive bulbs.
The color ones especially. Holy crap.
Oh, the color ones. Yeah, they're expensive. And I think they sometimes come with a warranty, but I've never bothered to, you know, save the receipts and figure that out. So check that too. Sometimes they come with a warranty.
But I've even had luck with bulbs from dollar stores, like, you know, $4 bulbs. They're still going strong in my laundry room where I require a lot of light. And I've got this octopus-like thing up in the ceiling trying to get as much light in there as possible. And they're all working fine so far.
It's hard to say for sure. I would, you know, you could check reviews from places like the Wirecutter. I assume they've done reviews that might include reliability things. But you know, for me, I really enjoy buying light bulbs, so the problem has never bothered me that much because it's like, ooh, I get to buy a new bulb now. But now you don't
get to anymore. I haven't bought a light bulb in years, honestly.
Yeah, but, you know, we have lots of light fixtures in our house, and some of them have gone prematurely. Some of them, then we switch over to a smart bulb and whatnot. So I'm not a typical user. I enjoy buying light bulbs.
Oh, you're a sick man, Brian. What else is new?
So we often talk about, I own a Tesla, and, you know, Tesla and other electric cars, they work really well in the winter, but every once in a while you come across something that, you know, really feels like this car was designed in California. Like that's a common sort of feeling. You know, you get these things where you think, oh, they didn't think about that because they're down in California. They don't think about where the snow collects and all that kind of thing.
And I get sick of watching YouTube videos where they say, and now we're doing a test in extreme cold condition below freezing. Oh, come on, people. Come on. You have no idea.
Below freezing. That's nothing. That's nothing.
That's a tropical day for us.
But anyway, I had this feeling that, I'm sure I've encountered this before in other products, and it finally dawned on me what it was, and I'm holding them here in my hand if you're watching on video. These are Beats Fit Pro. These are my Bluetooth headphones, and I have one in right now that I use for the podcast. These are wireless Bluetooth headphones. And this case, it's shiny plastic, and it's fine in the summer, but in the winter, it gets super dry around here. My skin gets super dry, and I put moisturizer on all the time. It doesn't matter. So all winter, I have these super dry hands, and I'm dropping this thing constantly. And I can guarantee you that these were designed in California, and no one in California has ever had this problem, but only in the winter, I drop this thing all the time. In the summer, it's fine, but it's super, super slippery in the winter when my hands are dry.
My hands are dry. I just don't do anything about it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I had also had my window open in my bedroom last night because we're experiencing near zero temperatures, which is considered extreme and by some people in the United States.
Yeah.
But
here it's an unusually mild January day.
Yeah. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that because I'm working on my Leaf, trying to solve some problems with it. The United States stocks have dropped on Monday sharply as chipmaker NVIDIA lost nearly $600 billion in market value after surprise advancement from Chinese artificial intelligence company DeepSeek threatened the aura of invincibility surrounding America's technological industry. Brian, I thought this was relevant to what we talk about, because I think this is coming for other things such as the automotive industry, which after I watched it, I'll talk about this later too. I watched a video this morning that made me think, holy crap, are they doomed? Like, there's just not a hope in hell. So DeepSeek, a one-year-old startup, revealed a stunning capability last week. I'm sure most people have heard about this if you have any connection to social media or the news, but it was a stunning revelation. It presented a chat GPT-like AI model called R1, which has all the familiar abilities and operating at a fraction of the cost of OpenAI, which means that also it's using a fraction of the electricity to train itself, which is interesting because a lot of what AI is going to use is the training of their models. And we talk about how electricity demand will go up for that. Well, Google or Meta's popular AI models cost many, many, many times more. This is just a fraction of the cost of those. The company said that it spent just $5.6 million on computing power for its base model, which is in some respects surpassed North American models, compared with hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars U.S. companies spent on their AI technologies. That sent shockwaves through markets. Yeah, there's going to be more of the same, and I don't think a lot of people realize this. Actually, this is probably a big wake-up call. The United States and some other countries believe that the United States is always going to be a world leader. That's not going to continue. There's just no way it can. It's just China is so formidable and so large and so well educated and so, going so strong on these things. And that's important that we keep up. Apparently, Biden had this, export tax or forbidden export of these NVIDIA modules, these chips for computing, and they just went and made their own, and that's, of course, what they did. So,
yeah, when you don't have access to something, it forces you to innovate, and that looks like that's what they did.
So I think this is a wake-up call for, it's a new world order. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but I mean, if China leads in AI, then they can dominate politically, they can dominate militarily, and they can also economically thrive better than us. PV Mart, that's a store in Canada that serves farmers. It's a store. Have you ever gone to PV Mart now and again for something weird? I don't know what, but
I go occasionally, and they have things like, cattle birthing tools.
But that's not what you're getting at. You're not birthing.
I'm usually getting like the T-shirts or the peanuts or something.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's stuff there. You see a flyer, you go down and there's something weird maybe you want to buy, or maybe it's a tool or something. Well, they're closing a lot of their stores, and it's significant because they were the first people to have EV charging in Western Canada. You would go to their store. This wasn't that long ago. I remember going there thinking I'm not going to make it home. I was, but my car was new, so I charged there, and they gave me the stink eye because all the people there are farmers or farm-related people. They work out of town. Yeah. They don't know what this EV stuff is. And yeah, it's no longer needed because we have so much other stuff going on, especially with level 3 charging, supercharging, fast charging.
Yeah, these were just smaller level 2 chargers, but many years ago, Sun Country, the company who makes the chargers, and I own one of those. I have one Tesla charger and one Sun Country. They convinced PV Mart to put them at their stores, and they were able to complete a cross Canada, the first cross Canada charging network through partners like PV Mart.
And I should mention that our friend Lowell Dean once again has a movie. And it is going to be called Dark Match. It is about wrestling. It's a horror wrestling film. And I'm not a wrestling guy. I imagine you're not, but I really enjoyed it when I saw it in Saskatoon when I had my flat tire going up there to host an event. I'm also hosting an event, a talk at this one, but it's in our city. It is February 4th at the Galaxy. I think it's a public event, and I'll be doing a Q&A with the cast and crew and director, but I've got a publicity person, a publicist on my ass, being very strict about everything this time. But I'll take that over the getting stranded on the side of the road for 4 hours in the middle of nowhere. That was awful. So Dark Match is the name of the film. I highly recommend it. It is from our friend Lowell Dean as the director. He made it in Edmonton with a production company that was involved in our film. It wasn't called what they were called back then, but the executive producers were involved in the film that Brian and I did, a little over 10 years ago now.
10 years ago.
So yeah, friends and family. And in Canada is at Cineplex Theaters.
Yes, and I have not seen it yet. I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be on Shudder on January 31st. See it in a theater if you can, but on the Shudder streaming service, this is the horror streaming service, January 31st. I'm really looking forward to it. I've been watching way more horror films in the last couple of years, and every once in a while I run into people and I'll recommend, this great horror film I saw. And often I get the response, I don't watch horror films. But you're really missing out. A lot of the really fun, good filmmaking being done right now is in the horror genre.
I was struck by the cinematography that, some of it was actually shot on VHS. Because there was reasons for that because of an 80s throwback. And it really looks good. And it really, you could tell the partnership with the cinematographer and Lowell really enhanced his directing. And I don't think that's happened before. I think, and sometimes it's probably been a barrier instead of a help. So you could really tell that it just works really well. And I think it's his best film. He may not even agree with that, but I do think it's his best. It's certainly most commercial. It moves really quickly. And
it's always hard to do good cinematography on a lower budget. And these tend to be lower budget movies. So it's amazing when it works out like that. That sounds great.
Yeah, you need a really talented cinematographer who's willing to work and can work in really rushed conditions, because it's got to be easier than it was when you had big, heavy lights, and now you've got LED lights and you need less light because, the camera's chips are better and all that.
I was just watching Severance. This is the Apple TV show that Ben Stiller directed. The first 2 episodes are out of the seconds. The cinematography is just absolutely stunning. Like, this is the most gorgeous TV show I've ever seen. And the cinematographer, I forget her name, but it's a woman from Quebec, is Ben right? Stiller's cinematographer. Yeah.
That's cool. I was just listening to him on a podcast yesterday talking about that. And the host, Conan, was, bragging about it. So the Hughes fire in California, the fires are pretty much taken care of in a lot of ways. I think they're all more or less under control because they had rain there, which is actually bad because wildfire areas, when the plants burn, they emit this resin, which prevents anything from, soaking into the ground. So the water there's flash flood warnings from that and just rolls downhill. Of course, vegetation's not there to suck it up anymore. And then they're worried about, the toxicity of everything. But I was really struck. I have a still here of a weather map forecast for what the humidity was before the rain came. And there's places here, like LAX is 27%, which is pretty low. But you go up to Malibu, and for some reason it was only 4% there. I think it was the Santa Ana winds were coming in. Santa Clarita was 7%. San Bernardino was 5%. And Chino was 3%. And,
Wow.
Santa Ana itself was 4%, and there was 5%, and it ranged all the way up to somehow 87% in a valley up north, and 20% in a couple of other places. But yeah, I just really, and Laguna Beach was 41%, but holy crap, that is dry. And yeah.
So anytime the humidity is that low, be prepared for a fire.
So I posted a video to our Patreon page as well as YouTube of me trying to drive my 2013 Nissan Leaf electric vehicle in very cold weather, which it's hard to do without a heater because the inside of the screen was heating up. And I was using this chemical from Rain-X for de-icing. And I was gagging on it. And somebody pointed out, look at the label on the jar. You can't use that in a closed space. So I was so desperate to drive my car that I wasn't, being cautious about things. Well, that's in the garbage now. I'm not, thanks to whoever that is, if they're a listener or a YouTube viewer.
So it's a de-icer, but it would be meant for spraying on the outside of your car,
use
not
only.
on the inside. And you wouldn't normally need it on the inside of your car, but your Nissan Leaf, the heater broke and it's just too expensive to fix.
So I started, okay, I got to have a plan B here. And there was a vehicle for sale in Moose Jaw for $11,000. It was $2,000 off. It was a 2016 Nissan Leaf, so it has a bigger battery than mine. It's a higher trim level, so it has things like cruise control, which I really miss in the city, believe it or not. And a few other things. It got built-in navigation. I don't know if you can update it or not. There's some perks. It also, the big one was that it had a heat pump, because it has a heat pump in addition to the resistive heater that I had. So if that breaks, and they do break, I would still have the heat pump. I would have some sort of a heater as a backup. Plus, down to -1, you can use that Celsius for heat, and it's a lot more efficient for those. But I feel like we don't have a lot of those days. There's some in the fall, and that's it. Because in the spring, it gets so sunny and hot here that even when it's cold, your car is too hot, and soon enough, you're turning on the air conditioning.
There's a greenhouse effect when the sun shines in your car.
And the car is black, which is convenient for not having a heater because it attracts the sun. So that car is now sold. If any of you have bought it, let us know. I want to know how it's working for you. But I looked in Quebec on Auto Trader, and that's the province in Canada that had always had so much good rebates. There's like new Generation 2 versions of Leaf selling for like $13,000 or listed for $13,000. Like,
wow,
they're really cheap, and it's because all their rebates have gone away. So that's going to change the market. So I maybe have to jump on that again. That's where I imported mine, was from Quebec, but it was a big ordeal to do that. I mean, the best way would be to go there, fly there, spend a couple days, and pick out a car. But there's lots of them, and they're way cheaper than Western Canada or even Toronto, which doesn't have a whole lot of stuff. So that's my plan. And also there was a guy on YouTube. A lot of people have had broken heaters, and there's not that many videos about fixing them, but some people are buying these little resistive heaters about the size of a pencil case. They have fins on them, and the air goes through, and you hook them up to your 12-volt system in your car. And I got one from Amazon yesterday and went down to a store and got some wire, some 10-gauge wire, which is really stubborn because it's so thick. And it was supposed to be 200 watts, but my Leaf Spy app said that the battery was getting charged up about 400 watts. So it was really hot, like it would burn you. It's got a little bit of a non-burning plastic-like stuff on the bottom that, like you would have on a toaster or something that gets hot, an appliance. But it does get very hot, and I was putting it over my vent, because that's what one guy did, is he put these over his vent on YouTube. The vents that are just right under your front window. Yeah. And that's where I need it, is to defrost. I can live with the cold in the car because I have heated seats. Yeah. And he also put like seat heaters, like raw seat heaters that you would do to install in a car that doesn't have them. They're just pads basically with wires sticking out. I
Yeah.
actually have a couple of seat heaters that plug into a cigarette lighter, ports. So I put those under my car mat because he said they made a difference. I felt like they did, but I could have been psychological. And also, it's pretty warm out right now.
Yeah.
I need it to work because your feet does get cold. So I'm experimenting with 12-volt heating. And it's, another guy tore apart his car and put these things where the old resistive heater was. Well, I mean, for $800 in the States, or even less, you could probably get one from a wrecker, which would be a lot easier than Canada, and just do that since you got the car apart anyway, and you have to cut the high voltage wires and take those out. Why do that? But that's what one guy did to hide them. So I'm working on it. I'm trying to keep it running, and yeah, I'll let you know how it goes. And of course, there will be videos. So, Brian, the state of EVs, Norway is on the cusp of meeting their 100% zero-emission vehicle goal, which was set for this year. And it seems like it's happening. Norway's 2025 goal is for all new cars and light commercial vehicles sold to be zero-emission vehicles. And this means that all new cars sold will be electric or hydrogen-powered. Not too many of those, though. How is Norway achieving this? Policy, for one. Norway has implemented regulations that limit the sale of fossil fuel vehicles. Incentives are another way. Norway offers tax rebates and exemptions from fees like registration taxes and road tolls. I think they're lessening those now that everyone's driving an EV, or half the vehicles on the road are. Infrastructure. Norway has invested in charging infrastructure to ensure that electric vehicles have access to fast and reliable charging. That's important. But also, education is the other point here. Norway has educated the public on the environmental and economic benefits of electric vehicles, which I'm kind of thinking doesn't happen all the time here. Like, we could use more of that.
Yeah. I mean, it's not always the focus for me because I always have this feeling of, well, it's inevitable. We are going to switch to electric vehicles, but all of these things would speed it up. There is always more to be done in terms of education.
Right. And for everyone else in the world, well, we're all looking for price parity. We always, we're looking for that for the last 20 years. When's that going to happen? Well, it's kind of happening. It's been a long goal, and the average price of an EV has fallen by 25% since 2018, so they are going down. In the US, the price difference between a combustion car and an EV was 50% in 2021. That's to say, in 2021, you had to pay 50% more for the equivalent EV, but that's only 15% now in 2023, 2 years ago. So that's made significant progress. And the reason maybe we don't necessarily think that EVs are getting cheaper is because all cars are getting more expensive. ICE cars, combustion vehicles, are getting more expensive, and EVs are kind of meeting now. The two things are coming together.
Yeah, it's a weird time, and we have quoted before the average price of a new car in Canada and the U.S.
It's
and
ridiculous.
I forget the exact numbers, but it's astronomical. It's just gone up an insane amount.
It is, and it's hard to believe. But EVs in the U.S. and Europe are still considerably more expensive than in China, of course. China has figured out, how to do this more or less. The average price for a new EV sold in China in the first half of 2022 was $33,400. That is compared to $58,600 in the European Union. In other words, practically half. And $67,000 in the United States, which is ridiculous. And now keep in mind, we started with premium cars. Luxury brands were the thing at first, when our automakers aren't really coming along too quick with getting the rest of them out. And also, our cars are bigger in North America. 40% of all vehicles sold in China in 2024 were plug-in hybrids or battery electric vehicles, surpassing 50% some months. Yeah, so that's on trend. 80% of all EVs bought in China in the first half of 23 cost under $42,000, and that's going way down. So China is got what they call not plug-in hybrids, but EVs with a generator, essentially. So it always acts as, even though you're using gas to back up that range. And China's a big country. It's the same size as the United States. You might want to go somewhere. So yeah, you can buy an EV and have that generator kick in for range anxiety or for long distances. And it still acts as an EV, though. You're not having a weak engine that's hybrid or maybe not quite as strong as a normal car. You get the full EV thing, which I like. And Ram was supposed to do that with a pickup truck. I'm not sure where they're at with that. I think they're a bit behind. So 80% of EVs were under $42,000 American in H1 2023, and that's coming down. Last year, you could buy a brand new Volkswagen ID4 Pro in China for around 30% less than the United States. 30%. Meanwhile, gas cars, like I said, are getting more expensive as the prices of EVs fall. From 2018 to 2024, the price of electric vehicles went down 11%, while ICE prices rose by 14%. So that is kind of taking place.
Yeah, so there's a couple of issues. We still, haven't moved down market enough here in North America. EV sales started with very expensive luxury cars. And yes, there's more options, but we're still kind of stuck in that luxury tier, and it just doesn't come down that much. But as you often point out, the deals that you can find, if you shop around, you can definitely find EV price parity in North America. You just have to be a diligent shopper and look around.
So fast chargers, interestingly, are coming down in price too. These are the chargers that are on highways, and they can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Especially to install them, you have to lease the land, and then you have to have this huge grid connection to have these batteries suck lots of power, potentially, if you have lots of stalls. And these are the ones that are more expensive, than charging at home. So that's because of that. Well, we haven't heard much in the way of that, but now Bloomberg is saying that the price of 300 to 400 kilowatt chargers averaged $58,000 in 2024, or $163 per kilowatt of power. And that's a 26% drop from when the survey was last done just 2 years ago. Clean Technica had that story. And I watched Kyle Connors from Out of Spec Reviews video. He went to China, he just got back, and he's got a summary sort of podcast video on YouTube. And he was saying that Tesla is behind there. They need to work to catch up, that there's a lot of competition. There isn't here. And he said even the crappiest EV he could find, the software was brilliant. There was no screen lag. Yeah. The self-driving was really good. There's lots of different versions of self-driving. Not full autonomous self-driving. There is that too. But I mean, as far as going on the highway and letting the car, take control for you. And I really think I'm getting more and more evidence that, there's entire cities that these automakers have, to their development. We talked last week about how there was 102,000 that engineers that BYD had in its R&D development. 102,000. How do you compete with that? Like there's just no way that our system of manufacturing cars is going to turn around and compete with that. Now, I personally don't think Tesla's going to compete with that. I think there'll be niche automakers like Porsche, because you want that specific styling and character of a car. But I just don't see North American automakers competing. I mean, we can't keep the Chinese out forever. People will one day say, well, the Chinese cars will get cheaper, and they'll show up even with 100% tariff, and they'll say, hey, this car's better. Why do I have to pay 100% tariff on this? And then the whole system is going to fall apart in the next 15 years, if not sooner. There's just no way. I just can't see it. So that's my update on the transition of EVs, where we stand after 5 years of the podcast.
Let's dip into the mailbag. Okay, just a quick update from our friend Ian, who wrote last week, and we talked about he was trying to get his 2017 Bolt from the west coast of Canada out here to the prairies in the winter. And James's advice was, don't do it. It's going to be too hard. I think you probably nailed it when you said you need about a 500 kilometer range car to really drive road trips in the winter in Canada. I think that's about right. And an old Bolt would be below 400 kilometers range, maybe 350. So yeah, you encouraged him not to do it. And it sounds like he's going to take your advice. He
One
says,
thing
wow,
I didn't mention, Brian, was that they charge slower in winter too. You've had success, even in very cold weather, of Tesla's.
As long as the battery is preconditioned.
If you precondition it by setting it into your navigation, I want to charge here, it will heat the battery and it will use some of its own energy to do that. And then it charges well. But the Bolt and many other cars do not do that.
Yeah.
So I wanted to mention that.
So the letter just says, wow, you guys really dug into my email. I think I'm going to make other arrangements for my trip. I love my car, but it's too bad our infrastructure is lagging so much behind. Cars like that are great city cars. And even, your old Leaf that we talk about all the time with no heat is still a great city car.
It is.
But if you want a highway car, 500 kilometers range. I did want to say, I'm
this is
stubborn.
for Canada,
I'm always,
by the way. We are in
Canada,
Western Canada where it gets really cold.
Yeah, and our cities are far apart and there isn't the charging infrastructure that there is in most places. So in other places, Ian could probably make this trip. There is probably still a way to do it. Like if you found hotels along the way, motels along the way that had charging and you just spent another couple of days. But, not everybody has time to do that.
He was willing to do that, but it's tricky because there's a large stretch between here and Calgary, which is like 700 kilometers. That is a barren wasteland for charging. Even in the summer, it can be sketchy sometimes. So,
but then the other solution I thought of, it's not ideal, but when you bought your Leaf from Quebec, they shipped it and it cost $1,000, $1,200 to ship it.
Yeah, it was a little over $1,000. I think I did this really low cost bidding service where some guys with a big trailer came.
Oh yeah,
they wheeled out a motorcycle to get my car out, and it was a great day for me, a big day.
Yeah, so I think if Ian really, really wanted his Bolt here in Saskatchewan, shipping it would be an option, $1,200.
Isn't he just making a trip? Is he moving back? What's the deal?
No, he's just spending time in both places. So.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. Yeah, I have to say, though, that's probably true. So, what else are you going to mention?
Oh, that's it. I think we can go on to the next letter.
Okay. So Ronnie sent us a TikTok video. He says, I thought this might be a good material for the show or for more research. Zigord Midnieks on why nuclear hasn't been working as a comeback and what would be needed to be done. Ronnie sent us this clip here.
We like using the same market economics for a bag of chips or a liver transplant. But the limitations of the market economy may be where the answer lies. We don't even have to admit the Chinese got it right, that reactor construction works better in a state capitalist system. The French have shown the way, and if we can rein in our chauvinism for a minute, we might study the way that the French nuclear power industry does in fact work.
Of course, France has a great deal of nuclear. Half of it was offline a couple summers ago for various reasons. They were struggling with overheating waterways and then drought leading to not enough water. So there was reliability issues in that sense. And plus the maintenance, they're getting older, these reactors. China is building new nuclear reactors. The idea is that, a lot of people who are pro-nuclear are saying, why small modular? Why is that going to solve the problem? If you want nuclear, go full on. We need so much power for data centers and things. Like data centers are buying their own nuclear reactor to keep going in a couple of cases. So why not do that? Why not get efficient at making big nuclear reactors and train a workforce? But again, we have 10 years to do this, 10 years to decarbonize the grid. If your shovel is not on the ground now, you have no hope of meeting that target with nuclear.
Yeah, I guess the idea is that if it's modular, you can build it in a factory, the components, and then assemble it on site, and that's supposed to be cheaper. But, modular homes is one of the things I looked at when we were thinking about building our new cottage, because there's people always trying to solve the problem of making cheaper housing that's still high quality, and building the components for a home in a factory is one of the ways that people do that. But I don't think people have really cracked that either. Like housing is expensive no matter what, unless it's kind of cheap and crappy. So building it in a factory, if it's nuclear, maybe it doesn't solve the problem because they're all smaller nuclear plants then, and then you just need more of them, and, who knows? Okay, so if you want to contact us, the email address is cleanenergyshow@gmail.com.
And you can also leave us a voicemail if you want, online voicemail at speakpipe.com/cleanenergyshow. Join the conversation on our Patreon page and see some of the supplemental content we post there for free for everyone. And becoming a Clean Energy Show member, though, supports our work, and you get perks in return, such as ad-free episodes delivered in high quality before the public gets them, and shout-outs on our podcast and videos. Most importantly, our monthly Patreon podcast, which is coming up soon, Brian. And I'm going to have a segment on solar in Gaza before and during wartime. It's very important in Gaza. If you've seen any footage of Gaza, and I'm sure you have, there's always solar panels around, and I wondered why that is, and the answer is very interesting. So we'll have that on our bonus podcast, which we'll record in about 8 days.
Yeah, sometime next week. Okay, this next story absolutely relates to the nuclear question. This is from Electrek, the world's largest solar plus storage project, set to deliver 24/7 power in the United Arab Emirates. So this is in Abu Dhabi. It's going to have 5.2 gigawatts of solar PV, coupled with 19 gigawatt hours of battery electric storage. So solar plus grid storage batteries. And guess what you get out of this, James, when you have that many batteries and that much solar?
This is quite something. I'm quite shocked. This is essentially a nuclear reactor. This is essentially baseload with solar. The stuff that everyone says can't be done, we knew could be done from day one of this show, and is now, because of economics and technology improvements, finally happening.
Yeah, so as a shorthand, you always like to say 1 gigawatt, because it's hard to imagine these numbers when you talk about power. I don't know what a gigawatt is, but you like to say 1 gigawatt of power. That's basically a nuclear power plant.
Coal-fired power plant, all the big generating types.
Roughly speaking. And so that's what they're getting out of this project with that much solar and 19 gigawatt hours. It is base load power, 1 gigawatt of base load power. So I've said this before, but if I was in the energy business and I had the option of the incredible headache of building a nuclear power plant, or just getting a bunch of solar panels and a bunch of batteries, it's just a no-brainer. I don't understand why anyone would go the nuclear route. Now, it doesn't have any cost figures in here. So, it's possible this is more expensive than a nuclear power plant, but I doubt it.
I don't think it is. Smaller scale stuff doesn't seem to be. The Emirates would be a good place for solar. In various places in the world, depending on where you are, if you have a 100-watt solar panel, you get maybe 30% of it in a good place, and maybe 20% where we are, or 15% in northern Canada, or north here in Canada. So yeah, it is tremendous that they're doing this finally. And, when this happens, it sets an example for everyone else, right? Like people saying, well, if they can do it, why can't we? And we always knew that solar, the boldest solar projects would take place in places that have the best solar first, and then they would spread to places that have poor solar. Well, even in, the Netherlands and places like that, they're way ahead than we are here. And our premier here, the head of the province, just said they're going to continue coal. We don't want to shut that down. Good, clean coal.
Yeah.
It's going to be cheap. Coal's cheap. It's the cheapest way. The solar and renewable stuff's so expensive. Well,
when you have to dig it out of the ground and burn it, as opposed to a fuel cost of zero, that obviously
and then no one is going to want to do business here. No one's going to want to do business. We don't have hardly much hydro, so our grid is very dirty no matter how you look at it. And yeah, you're not going to set up a data center here. You're not going to set up a factory because the grid's dirty.
And even if this Abu Dhabi project, even if it cost the same amount as a nuclear power plant, you're going to have it online, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years earlier than your nuclear power plant, and you get then an extra 8 years of power generation out of your project.
There's been solar in this parts of the world that have been installing what our current solar farms are in Saskatchewan, Canada, 10 megawatts in a day. They have such a huge plant, they put 10 megawatts up in a day. So 2 years, 3, 4 years, if there's a permitting issue or a land issue, and wow, it could be done in 2 years. I think it could be done in less than 2 years. But that is way faster than any nuclear timeline. And you don't have to dispose of the waste. You don't have to worry as much about people being offended by it. They are, and especially in, the Western world, we have a lot of unnecessary opposition to solar. And people are, spreading all kinds of crap out there and false information, and people, like everything else, are believing it. So yeah, that is a great news story, and perhaps one of our best stories. If I had a top 100 list of our stories, that would be on it. And by the way, what is your top 100 list of stories? Because we have a 5-year anniversary show that is going to be coming up in February. We want to know what story you heard here on the show that really inspired you or surprised you, or stuck in your brain in some way, or maybe one that we missed. So that would be good as well. Brian, why are the trees left standing in the wildfires in California that have decimated neighborhoods but left the odd tree? I was curious about this, and Cal Fire had a very lengthy tweet on this on their social media. Many of you have wondered why trees often remain standing after wildfire, even when nearby houses and structures are destroyed. The answer lies in the difference between wildfires and conflagrations. The answer lies in the difference between wildfires and conflagrations. Wildfire viz. Conflagration. In a wildfire, flames often move as a front, consuming vegetation, but not always spreading to everything in their path. Conflagrations, on the other hand, occur when one structure catches fire and spreads through flammable connections like wood fences, igniting house after house, something I'm concerned about here. I have a lot of fence, a lot of old fence, and very flammable fence against a lot of weeds. The weeds can be taller than my children out in the oil pipeline behind my house. That's a grass field. This also occurs more easily due to the intense heat produced by a structure fire, coupled with the close proximity of structures. So those structure fires, if your house is close to another structure, and this was the case in Fort McMurray in Alberta, and they're rebuilding the same way, by the way. They haven't changed anything. It was a one-off. This is never going to happen again. Climate change isn't real. Let's just build back and everything will be fine. Well, you in a modern world, you don't want to build close together. You want higher density housing. You don't want sprawl. But the good thing about sprawl is, when you're in a wildfire or a wildland urban interface, is that, the structures may not burn because the heat gets so hot from these structures. And if the firefighters are, down the street, there's a house burning, they will hold down the house next to it and control that. But if the whole city's burning, the whole neighborhood's burning, they just let the houses burn. They can't do anything about it. And then it starts the house next door on fire and so on, because it does get so hot. And it creates all these, flammable emissions from all the oil products in the house. And then that bursts into a giant fireball that's very hot. This also occurs more easily due to the intense heat produced by a structure fire, coupled with those proximity of those structures, says Cal Fire. Now, here's why trees survive, they say. Some trees have natural adaptation to withstand fire. That's impressive. A lot of trees in California, though, aren't naturally there. They're imported. And do you see any footage of palm trees on fire, Brian?
No.
They're quite spectacular. I don't know if it's the nut cluster or whatever it is just before the spreading out of the palms. Those things ignite very easily from embers, and they just start shooting flames everywhere like crazy, like ember flames. And it's like a fireworks display that goes on. And that was, not helpful.
Anyway, no, and of course, those palm trees are not native to California either.
They're not. And thick bark acts as a heat shield, protecting their inner layers. So some trees have thick bark. natural shape sheds embers and debris, reducing ignition risk if their natural shape, sort of resists those embers and keeps them away from the drier areas of the tree. Moisture content, higher moisture content than older building materials slows the spread of fire. So there's a higher moisture content in those living trees than there is in the dead wood in your house. While trees may still be singed, they are often less flammable than structures. Why homes are more vulnerable. This is, again, from Cal Fire. Houses are built with materials and features that make them prone to ignition. Combustible materials, wood, siding, roofing can ignite quickly. That's wood roofing, especially from nearby fires. Openings and vents. We've covered this before. You need an 1/8-inch screen, and there are some fireproof screens you can get for your vents on your roof. In your attic, if you have a vented attic, embers can enter and spark fires inside and even from a distance. And, the way attics are made is that it sucks in air. They're made to suck in the warm air and shoot it out the top to keep everything dry. So you're actually sucking in the natural ventilation of the system there, actually sucks in the embers. So heat traps, flat surfaces, and air currents can intensify flames once they reach the interior. Removing flammable items within the first 5 feet, that's zone 0 of a home, creates a defensible space, helping to break the pathway for wildfire spread and reducing the risk of flames reaching structures. Take action to safeguard your home against wildfire risks, says Cal Fire, and you can learn more at readyforwildfire.org. Now, the CBC, I was driving home the other morning from dropping my kid off at school, had a story on what I talked about at the podcast, and I can't help but think that they were listening to the podcast and did a story on what I was talking about, which is entirely possible. So they did a story on how much of a risk are you and I, Brian, living in a city on the prairies compared to people in a forest interface with urban areas. And yeah, they talked to experts. So while being further south and surrounded by different landscape, Regina and Saskatoon aren't immune, that's where Brian and I live, is Regina, to wildfires. We aren't immune to them, according to John Pomeroy, a distinguished professor at the Center for Hydrology at the University of Saskatchewan. Brian, why were you never a distinguished professor? And what is a distinguished professor? I always thought you were distinguished.
Yeah, I don't know.
He noted the Corman Park fire, that is a suburb out in the boonies just outside of Saskatoon, of last August destroyed $3 million of property. Do you remember that? It was a grass fire that overtook buildings and vehicles and farm vehicles and just wiped them out because it was windy and dry.
No, I missed that.
It wasn't even sunny. So $3 million of property and 300 acres of land on the outskirts of Saskatoon. And he says, under the right conditions, yes, this can happen to us as well. And unfortunately, the right conditions are coming. This is not our 10-day forecast. This is our century forecast. Things are going to get worse. And temperatures are going to go up 6 or 7 degrees here compared to pre-industrial norms. So hotter, potentially drier and windier with larger pressure differentials between hot and cold weather systems or high and lows. And yeah, by the way, Fire Weather Author, that's one of the 2 books I'm reading, was on National Public Radio on Friday. So maybe CBC National said we should get this guy on the show. I don't know, Brian.
Yeah.
It just seems the media is following our lead. That's all I'm saying.
Sure.
The host asked him if he thought anyone was paying attention to what was going on with climate change and fires. And here is what he had to say.
Based on the amount of media I've done over the past 2 weeks, Matt, they seem to be listening. I mean, I've been very, very busy, and people have wanted to have really real difficult conversations. And it's hard to do. It's hard to admit that the world isn't the same anymore. It's hard to admit that we're more vulnerable. And my sense from the conversations I've had is that people are girding their loins and starting to face that fact and really looking earnestly for solutions. And I really admire that. And I really want to be part of that process.
That's John Valiant, author of Fire Weather. It's a book I'm reading about the Fort McMurray fires and the type of fires that are burning in the 21st century, how they're different, and how dry, windy, hot conditions are changing fire behavior. Is a fascinating book and highly recommended. And I'm also reading the book Ducks about life in the Canadian tar sands. You've already had that on your book report. I'll update you on what I've been learning about that book later in the show.
Yeah, and we've known, for a long time that the climate is changing, things are going to be different. But I didn't really expect wildfires to maybe be the thing that was going to take over the conversation. We all knew there were going to be more disasters. I wasn't necessarily expecting wildfires. Yeah. And when they happen in a very visible place like Los Angeles, at least it adds some visibility to the issue. And according to the author there, maybe this is, starting to get people to wake up. Okay, another story here from Electrek. This is from Washington State. They're coming out with an e-bike incentive program. We've talked about many of these programs before. Individual states and cities are often coming up with incentive programs to help people buy electric bikes because it's one of the best ways to decarbonize a city. It's one of the best ways to help things like traffic flow in your city. We don't want our streets congested with a lot of cars. So Washington State now has a program. It's not yet available, but they've got $5 million earmarked for electric bicycle rebates, and it's being funded by the state's emissions taxes as part of the Climate Commitment Act, which did receive a lot of support from voters in the state. So they're putting a price on emissions, and they're taking some of that money and putting it into electric bicycles. So the rebates are going to be from $300 for those making more than 80% of the area median income, up to $1,200 for lower income residents. And it's going to be a similar system to others we've talked about. There's an online portal where you put in your information, and I imagine you have to prove your income level in some way. But instead of a first come, first serve system, they're going to do a lottery. So everybody submits, and then at random, they're going to pick people who are eligible for this program.
Yeah. So I wonder what the odds are of that lottery. Probably better than your Powerball, but, still not a guaranteed thing. But I like how they're going to cover, not for everyone. It's not the same based on income because, if you're on a poorer income and, like bus services underserved in poor communities, you can get $1,200 in the United States. That'll buy you an e-bike right there if you need one.
Yeah, $300 to $1,200. That seems like a nice range where a lot of people can get helped out at different levels.
And if you have a better income, $300 might be a nice incentive to get you to go look at one. Now it is time for a segment we haven't had on the show for a long time. Brian, it's Book Nook.
Book report.
No, pardon me, book report. That's you singing. We rarely hear you sing on the show.
Oh, that's right. I totally forgot about that. And I guess we don't have this segment on the show very often because I guess we don't read
earnestly
books.
made that as an intro clip to a segment that you only did once. So it's a miracle that I'm reading a book and I can bring it back here because all the work you put into that.
Well, and it's the same damn book, so I don't know.
It's the same book, probably. So Ducks by Kate Beaton. She is a Canadian author from Cape Breton on the east coast of Canada. Like many people on the east coast of Canada who are in struggling communities, and she was in a small coastal community that survived on lobster fishing and other sort of fisheries type stuff. Well, she went out to nowhere in Canada, basically. It's like 400 or 500 kilometers northeast of Edmonton. It's often to the northern boreal forest. Fort McMurray has about 100,000 people, including 30,000, temporary workers. And then north of the city, there's these the city's nothing on the map on Google Satellite, but these freaking operations, which they are ripping tar oil out and then boiling that oil to get the oil out of the sand. It's an incredible operation. And you did talk about this on the show quite a while ago now, but I got interested because of the other book that I'm reading about the culture of the oil sands. And I'm fascinated by one aspect, and that is how people behave differently in an industry where you're getting a lot of money. Because, a welder or a plumber in the oil sands can make a doctor's salary. And if you're a young man and you're isolated, or maybe you have a family and you don't see your family, you fly out to see your family every 12 days after working 12-hour shifts. And then, she talks about cocaine use, which was common. People operating equipment with cocaine in their system. You can't take pictures out there. There's this, culture that you cannot take a selfie in the shop with your buddy who you're working with because it's just forbidden. It's just the oil has so much power. And I think we need to talk more about that because they are lobbying governments to do bad things because there is so much power. And the people who work in the oil industry make so much money compared to renewables that they want to keep it. So she was raised in Mabu, Nova Scotia, fresh out of Mount Allison University in New Brunswick with an arts degree. The arts degree she wanted to pay off, so she went out there. Now, she was only, I think, making, the point of the book where I'm reading is like $22 an hour, but her living expenses were all paid. The food, the lodging were all paid.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, and with inflation, I'm assuming those rates have gone up.
Yeah, that's about 20 years ago.
But she managed to pay off her student loans by, I think, 2 years of working there.
Yeah, and I think her sister came out and got cancer. But here's a clip. I listened to some interviews of Kate Beaton talking about the book. I noticed that everything that I've reading so far is a constant sexual harassment. That's all it is. It's from every angle, every nook and cranny. Sexual harassment is coming at her from all directions. And later in the book, I understand she was even assaulted. So this is her talking about that book. Kate Beaton.
When you're working in a place like the Long Lake Project and they're just building it, and you look beyond it and it's the forest and you're digging into it, you're so well aware of the barrier that you're breaking between yourself and the natural world. The scale of things just is unbelievable. So of course I had to put those things in the book in some way and give a scale of things. And the first time that you see something like Syncrude, you usually see it if you're driving in the dark because you're coming in on a bus at 6 a.m. You'd have to drive in and see the smoke lit up by smokestacks, like fire and things through the darkness. It just looks like something out of science fiction.
Yeah, grand scale of things. That is the most dirty and most energy-intensive oil extraction in the world. We have to electrify the world and get rid of the need for that.
And it is a fantastic book, highly recommended.
Coming up, it's the lightning round. Stay tuned. It's time for the lightning round.
The lightning round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy and transportation.
German media claims Volkswagen may be negotiating with a Chinese company about a joint venture in Germany. Oh, snap! Didn't see that coming. That's on Clean Technica. As Europe gets hotter, more people are expected to die from extreme heat, outweighing the reduction in those killed by very cold weather. Yeah, people die in cold weather. Now there's less of them dying in cold weather. Now there's some of them dying in hot weather. And they're saying the net benefit is bad. There's a net negative. So cities in Northern Europe regions such as the UK and Ireland, and by the way, hello, Ireland, you had a terrible windstorm there. I hope our listeners, including Sean, are safe and sound and everybody's okay. And your daughter, who is trying to become on the Clean Energy Show voice actor. And Scandinavia would see an overall reduction in deaths due to milder winters, according to a study published in the journal Nature Medicine on Monday. But this positive effect would be overwhelmingly eclipsed by the rising death toll further south. In total, it means a higher loss of life from extreme temperatures. That story is on Bloomberg. By relying on nuclear power, France achieves a record of 95% carbon-free electricity production in 2024. 95% carbon-free. And some renewables. So solar power is growing in every EU country, Brian. I've got a map here, a graph of all the stuff that's going on here. And in 2019, Austria, for example, was at 2% and now is 12%. And Spain was like 6%. It is now 21%. And Portugal, 3 to 14%. Greece, 9 to 22%. Even Cyprus. The island of Cyprus went from 4% to 20%. So all these countries, Poland went from 0% to 9%. In that one in 5 years. So we could be doing that. There's parts of it's so frustrating, you and I, we live in a place where we could be doing that.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think solar has even hit the 1% mark here, and I don't even think it will after new operations are open. It's a very frustrating place to live. It is time for a CES Fast Fact. Speaking of big oil, evil big oil spent $445 million, almost $500 million to keep Trump and Congress in their pocket. And boy, did it work. This is from Marquez Brownlee, a YouTube influencer and tech reviewer. He said there's a really interesting video that somebody made for him, another channel, when they asked him for his specs of his 2025 dream smartphone. So he gave all the specs of the different cameras and the different things that he wanted and how much it would actually cost. Well, the total was about $500 for his dream phone. This is the guy who knows all tech and wants the best of the best. So it was about $500.
Top of the line phone.
But what struck me was the 600 milliamp hour battery was only $13. So, you know, battery technology and cost and energy density is improving. The battery was a big part of phones for a long time.
And if you open up a smartphone, it's like 90% battery in there. All the other components have been miniaturized as much as possible. So even though the phone is mostly battery, that only costs $13. That's crazy.
A temperature anomaly of 30 degrees Celsius will hit the North Pole on February 2nd, according to forecasts 2025. Yeah, that was a forecast that was run on January 26th of this year, 2025. 30-degree anomaly. That is 30 degrees above normal at the North Pole. That is not... We talk about how the more north you go, the more anomalies there are in temperature due to climate change. That one is... Well, it's not going to burn down. You know, for a second there, I had this fear. Oh, God, last time we did this, the place burned down. But that's nasty. Texas solar power increased 64% in 1 year. And I assume it's because they're all granola crunching hippies down there, Brian. And not because it's an economical way of generating electricity. China built only 3.9 gigawatts of nuclear in 2024. And that's only 29% of the 13.5 gigawatts of hydro, and 1%, that nuclear is 1% of the 370 gigawatts of wind and solar they built in 2024. So they're adding a lot of power, but it's mostly solar. And finally, this week...
They're still doing nuclear, but they're not in any way stopping from all the other massive investments in everything else, wind and batteries and solar and so forth.
Okay, finally this week, just this. Solar generated 11% of EU's electricity in 2024, and that has overtaken coal. So finally, coal has got their butt kicked in Europe, partially thanks to Putin. For the first time in history, solar, just solar, not wind and solar. Wind is big in Europe. Solar eclipsed coal, and coal, of course, is declining. That's the lightning round.
And that is our show for this week. You can contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. Around social media, we're Clean Energy Pod. And you can join our Patreon community for free and get some special content not found elsewhere. And that link is in the show notes. You can buy something from our merch store, and we have that link as well in the show notes. And please rate and review us, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever your podcast app is. And make sure to hit that follow or subscribe button on the podcast app to get these episodes delivered every week.
And like I said, our 5th anniversary is quickly approaching. If you have any favorite story from our 5-year run that stuck with you, drop us a line, please. cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. Thanks to all our Patreon members, and especially those who are Clean Club Executive members, which I mention on the show every week: Green Bastard, Brent Routley, and Ryder. Patreon podcast is coming up soon, as I said, so if you have any things that you want us to talk about, do so. I will be doing this story on Palestinian solar in the Gaza Strip, and if you become a paying member of our Patreon page, you will get that free podcast that we do every month, and ad-free episodes, early access to our episodes, and thank you credits on our video podcast, and shout-outs on our audio podcast from time to time. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.